All right, everybody. I should be live. And if I am, please let me know in the chat so we can get started tonight because we have a lot of things to discuss. And of course, we're going to talk about some of the current events that are happening right now regarding the tariffs and the trade war and everything else related to that. But then we're also going to discuss some of these things regarding these protests that are going on and who exactly is paying for them, because I think there are some interesting things there that you would like to know about that might sway some of your decisions in the future. I don't know. But here we are. Welcome to another Monday. I want to mention Midway USA, biggest supporter of the channel, awesome partners, very cool company to work with, and of course they support the preparedness community, and I appreciate them for that. So a big thanks to Midway USA for making live streams like this possible. 5x5s are coming in. We have David Hicks saying all good, and I'm saying thank you so much for that. Harbor Prepper with the 5x5. Johnny D. We have Robert P. with the L and C. We also have the Goggles Do Nothing with the 5x5. So I think that means we can get started tonight. And of course, well, 308 by Hot Chocolate Chip Cookies for Real Indie says Jet. I guess that just means we're good to go. So excellent. Very excited to see everybody tonight. Thank you so much for being here. And, probably having to search out this live stream because I don't know if these notifications ever even go out anymore. But I appreciate the effort. And, of course, replay crew, make sure you check in down below in the comments section so that way I can always come back and say hi and just see that, you're here. And it's very motivating for me. Now, we have some interesting things that just occurred, and I want everyone to be aware of it, and I want you to kind of see that maybe this was the strategy to begin with, but some of the damage, you could say, has already been done, especially related to the stock market and everything else, and that's okay because we all know there's going to be growing pains, but this is where we currently stand, okay? Trump and leaders of Canada and Mexico say tariffs will be delayed 1 month after talks. So, Canada and Mexico have both been given a 30-day grace period to comply with whatever requirements the Trump administration has placed upon them in order to avoid having additional tariffs put on their imported goods. And obviously, I think that was the strategy to begin with, but I don't know for a fact. That's just my assumption, and it does seem to have worked if that's what the initial goal was. Days after announcing a 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico, President Donald Trump agreed to delay them for 1 month after leaders from Canada and Mexico announced moves to ramp up security at their borders, averting, at least for now, tariffs that could have driven up prices for U.S. consumers and stalled the country's economies. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wrote on social media Monday afternoon that Canada would be spending $1.3 billion on a plan to reinforce its border with new helicopters, technology, and personnel, as well as additional resources to stop the flow of fentanyl. Canada had announced its $1.3 billion border and immigration investment at the end of last year. Okay, so that was already announced, which means there's likely other capitulations that have occurred that more than just this $1.3 billion investment. But we do know that there was a phone call, and we also know that it was said on social media that this is happening in order to avert some of these tariffs. Trump soon posted as well, focusing on fentanyl and emphasizing that tariffs would be paused for a 30-day period to see whether or not a final economic deal with Canada can be structured. Earlier in the day, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum posted on social media that Mexico will immediately reinforce its northern border with 10,000 members of the country's National Guard to address drug trafficking from Mexico into the U.S., particularly fentanyl. Once again, Trump said in his own post on social media that the U.S. will continue negotiations with Mexico over border security, headed by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. The announcements came after Trump signed an executive order Saturday to place a 25% tariff on nearly all goods coming into the U.S. from Canada and Mexico starting on Tuesday. The move risked triggering a trade war with two of Americans' closest trading partners that could have driven prices higher for American consumers on a range of goods, including cars, fresh produce, home building materials, and gasoline. Trump also placed a 10% tariff on all Chinese imports and took steps to close a loophole that allows Chinese e-commerce companies like Temu and Shein to avoid tariffs by shipping packages worth less than $800 into the U.S. duty-free. Those tariffs remain on track to go into effect on Tuesday. China said it will challenge the tariffs at the World Trade Organization and will take unspecified countermeasures in response. So far, China has been quiet, and that's what I put on the thumbnail for tonight, because although the tariffs on Canada and Mexico have been paused temporarily in order to maybe meet some kind of an economic agreement, China has not said anything per se regarding any retaliations or anything along the lines of what Mexico or Canada had said. So we don't know what their plan is, but we do know that those 10% tariff imposements on China are staying currently. So that will still affect us here in the sense of being a consumer in the United States when most of our products, and especially things like, I don't know, our pharmaceuticals come from China. So this is something that you have to be aware of, especially if you are on medications or if you are on anything related to the pharmacy. Be aware that your drug prices might increase here, at least in the interim. So that's what this is about here, just to give you some ideas about what's going on. Trump fired the latest tariff shot at China. Is Beijing prepared to make it a trade war? Now, this is from CNN. Not really the biggest fan of them, but we do get the information we need from this article. President Donald Trump has finally made good on a campaign promise to raise tariffs on Chinese imports, announcing on Saturday duties of 10% on all Chinese goods coming into the country as part of sweeping trade measures that also targeted Mexico and Canada. Now the question for Chinese leaders is how strongly to retaliate. In the wake of the announcement, Chinese officials who were hit by Trump's move on the middle of a week-long public holiday vowed to file a complaint with the World Trade Organization and take corresponding countermeasures without specifying in what form. The imposition of a 10% tariff on Chinese goods imported to the United States seriously violates the WTO rules, China's Ministry of Commerce said in a statement Sunday, adding that China will resolutely defend its rights. This is coming from a country who doesn't care about anyone's rules at all. So keep that in mind as these things move forward. That response, at least so far, has been noticeably less concrete than the ones from Mexico and Canada, which we just discussed. But there are other reasons besides the number next to the percentage sign and China's public holiday that could account for the comparatively mild response from the world's second largest economy. Okay. Beijing has enjoyed an unexpectedly warm start to Trump's second term, a welcome development for Chinese leaders as they seek to avoid escalating trade and tech frictions at the same time as the export-relying country's economy slows. Chinese leader Xi Jinping and Trump had what the U.S. leader called a very good phone call days before Trump took office, and his inaugural ceremony was attended by the highest-level Chinese official to ever be dispatched to such an event. The U.S. president has also sent other signals he's in deal-making mode with Beijing, saying he hopes to work with Xi on resolving Russia's war in Ukraine and suggesting in a recent interview with Fox News that he thought Washington and Beijing could reach a trade deal. While the president campaigned on winning economic competition with China and stacked his administration with a bevy of China hawks, the recent tone may suggest to Beijing that it's better not to escalate too extensively, at least not yet. So, be aware of that. We all know what comes from China. Like I said, I would say, pharmaceuticals are definitely something in the crosshairs, and I would also say that we are going to feel it one way or the other if the 10% tariff stays. Now, they could be a negotiating tactic like what we just saw with Canada and Mexico. I don't know, but that is something that is definitely possible. And of course, this just kind of verifies the discussion about pharmaceuticals here. Trump's China tariffs are likely to drive up drug prices and spur shortages. President Donald Trump's executive order imposing a 10% tariff on Chinese imports is likely to drive up the cost of generic drugs in the United States and exacerbate drug shortages, experts say. About half of generic drugs people take in the U.S., including cancer drugs, antibiotics, and blood thinners, are made entirely overseas, where manufacturing is cheaper, said Dr. Aaron Kesselheim, a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School whose research focuses on prescription drugs. An even greater share of the active pharmaceutical ingredients, or APIs, used in drugs comes from abroad, around 80%, he said. We've talked about that a lot on this channel as well as in this community as a whole, because we know that if there ever was a hot war with China in the future, that we would have to try to source our own APIs here within the country, or else we'd be in a very bad state. Of course, we can get APIs from other countries like India, but of course, logistics, supply chains, and everything else are problematic when you're talking about a country that literally shares a border with China as opposed to being on the other side of the planet. So these are all things that we have to keep in mind moving forward regardless of these tariffs, but this is just something that could be affected by them directly. China is increasingly playing a role in making these ingredients, according to data shared by United States Pharmacopoeia, a nonprofit group that focuses on the safety of the drug supply chain. In 2023, China had about 219 API facilities, up from about 134 in 2021, according to the group. India remains the largest producer of APIs with about half of all facilities. So, just be aware of that. I wanted to make sure you had that brought to your attention, especially if you're someone who relies on daily medications or anything along those lines. there is a good chance that your cost of those medications could go up. Even if it's just temporary, it still could affect you, and it's something that I think you should know about. Now, go ahead and jump over here. Lysander Spooner says, I can respect China for not wanting to follow rules. And I agree with that. I've always kind of questioned that as just somebody who thinks, outside of the box of the rules, I guess. But yeah, as a sovereign nation, do I really care if a bunch of other countries decide that I can or can't do something? Or am I going to do whatever is in my best interest? And in China's case, that's what they do, right? And I think most of the time in America's case, that's what we do. And I think we're seeing that even being pushed further now regarding different organizations like the World Health Organization or NATO or any of these other organizations that are currently being questioned about whether or not we need to be participating or participating to the same degree that we have been in the past. And of course, we also know that we just recently pulled out of the USAID, which is where a lot of these foreign countries receive foreign aid from the US. So there's a lot of things happening in that regard. I understand what you're saying 100%. Now, let's see here. JD made it 71 in Texas tonight. Well, happy birthday if that's what you're saying, or if it's 71 degrees, and I'm very jealous of you because it's negative 15 degrees here right now. Regardless, we still like you and we're glad you're here. So, what about things moving forward regarding these tariffs? Why is all this talk about, the economy and money and everything else happening right now? I don't know, but we do know that Trump is talking about a sovereign wealth fund, which is interesting. I just wanted to touch on it really quickly because this is something that, just happened today. And I think that we all have a lot to keep up on with all these executive orders and all this change that's being implemented very quickly that could technically affect us directly. So just to kind of touch base on this to let you know that this is what's happening. President Trump is taking steps to overhaul the way the U.S. government invests its money and change the nature of America's financial presence abroad. The president signed an executive order Monday that kicked off the process of creating a sovereign wealth fund with the goal of generating more revenue for the government. Trump also suggested that the fund could be used to purchase TikTok, the popular video sharing app that will be subject to a ban if it's not sold by ByteDance, its China-based parent company. A sovereign wealth fund could be a significant shift from the U.S.'s approach to foreign investment, and Trump's order raised myriad of questions about how it would work. But the prevalence of state wealth funds and bipartisan interest in a federal version gives Trump the Trump administration a path forward. Here are 5 things to know about Trump's plan for a sovereign wealth fund, right? Now, it just goes through the entire thing, which is something I am not going to read through on this particular live stream. But one thing that's interesting about it is that it's the idea that the government is going to invest money in order to have additional money for investments in the future, basically creating its own bank of sorts, let's just say. But what I would say is that if the government is investing in itself or investing in its sovereign wealth, let's just say, and has the money to do so, that to me would mean that there's some level of surplus, right? And that at that point, the way it should work is if the government has any extra money, we're paying too much in taxes, and that needs to change first. So I would like to see things change regarding how much we're taxed or anything regarding the income tax or things along those lines before we start talking about investing in things from the government standpoint, especially tackling the national debt would be a good idea as well, right? So these are all considerations to make. And of course, I think the tariff situation is good in the sense of it negotiating towards not necessarily hurting people that are living day to day just trying to get by. But I also understand that the additional tariffs might just be what is required for this country to start bailing itself out of a catastrophic debt load. So I'm not exactly sure how I feel about which way it's going, but I do know that I think negotiations are positive, and I think that is progress, and I think that it was likely the strategy from the beginning, right? So I wanted to talk about that because, there was a lot of discussions about the tariffs. I just put out a video yesterday about the tariffs. It was while I was wearing a gas mask, so it wasn't very easy to understand. But, when it's negative 8 degrees outside and you get all geared up to go test out gear and you bring your filming equipment in order to film any failures or any positive benefits of said gear, then, you want to bust out a video while you're out there filming already. And in negative 8, I wasn't going to take off the gas mask. So that's where we were at. I won't do it again to you in the future, I promise. Now, let's see here. Man, you guys, it's so warm for you guys right now. I'm very proud of you, but also very jealous. Negative 15 degrees right now. I'm just going to go ahead and repeat it. Now, we have some other things that are developing because of the immigration policies and because of what the crackdown is related to. And these protests are something we're going to touch on because I don't know if you saw the thumbnail tonight, but I did say protest brought to you by Ford, right? And I don't know if people realize just how direct that actually might be. So I want to make sure we touch on that because we have to understand that these people don't have Americans' best interests at heart. They don't have the people who are concerned about immigration's best interests at heart, right? They're only worried about profit margins. So it's really unfortunate that they are specifically creating chaos and creating, all the things we expect from these organizations, but some of them are tied to some rather large companies who, I don't know, might manufacture a major portion of their vehicles, their number one selling truck, in Mexico. So these are things to keep in mind, but I don't know. I'm just trying to throw some stuff out there to see if anybody has any interest in learning more about it. But first off, let's talk about how the Mexican drug cartels are retaliating to this crackdown at the border by allowing for drones to be used, weaponized drones, against Border Patrol agents, okay? And I am sorry that I have all these ads, but I've said before, in case anybody's new here, if you use ad blocker software while doing a live stream, it does not work properly and your live stream does not move smoothly. And I'm sorry, but that's just something I had to learn the hard way, so here we are. So, Mexican drug cartels plan attacks on Border Patrol agents with kamikaze drones and other explosives to fight U.S. crackdown. Mexican drug cartels are ordering their members to attack U.S. Border Patrol agents with kamikaze drones and other explosives in a desperate bid to thwart the crackdown at the border, according to an internal memo obtained by the Post. The alert, which cites social media posts and other sources, cautions federal agents to remain cognizant of their surroundings at all times in the face of the new threat. On February 1st, 2025, the El Paso Sector Intelligence and Operations Center received information advising that the Mexican cartel leaders have authorized the deployment of drones equipped with explosives to be used against U.S. Border Patrol agents and U.S. military personnel currently working along the border with Mexico, the internal memo titled Officer Safety Alert said. Okay, this is quite an escalation. Federal agents working the border are also advised to carry proper equipment at all times, including first aid kits, tourniquets, and body armor. The memo also notes that rifles should be readily available. News Nation, which first revealed the memo, also reported that posts on TikTok and other social media sites by the cartels have advised illegal migrants to spit and urinate in the ICE agents' food and defecate in their vehicles. Other posts have encouraged assassins to target agents. Just days after taking office, Trump vowed to send 10,000 U.S. troops to help secure the border, while his border czar, Tom Homan, has launched deportation raids across the country targeting migrant criminals. Okay? And this new threat from narco-traffickers south of the border comes amid that major crackdown. Mexican cartel bosses, who recognize the stepped-up U.S. presence at the border will cut deep into their drug and human trafficking operations, have turned things up a notch, the leaked memo showed. So, I still haven't been able to source the memo myself, but this was released by News Nation, then reported on by the Post, and has been picked up by other media, so I assume somebody has seen it somewhere. I wasn't able to source it. If you were able to source it, that'd be cool, just for us to take a look at the actual memo, and I think it's always good to verify those things, but I also know that enough news sources have picked it up at this point in time where I would find it unlikely that the memo doesn't exist at all to begin with. I just couldn't source it myself. Just trying to be transparent and let everyone know about that, but I also don't doubt that the drug cartels are authorizing that type of force as well as using that type of technology, because we've talked about it here on this channel many, many times. Like, they use drones already. They've used explosive drones in their own turf wars in Mexico. So there's really no reason to believe they wouldn't use them for other reasons. And especially if they were just trying to basically create some kind of space and a barrier to get through regarding their trafficking operations, that might be something they're willing to do, right? So these are things we need to be aware of, and we need to keep an eye out for regarding, the health and well-being of our agents down on the southern border. So, what about the thousands of tunnels on the border? Why no one's speaking about that? Erikel Toros. Well, I don't know exactly. I'm sure there are considerations about them because they're very publicly known about, right? So I have zero doubt that these tunnels have been at least targeted or examined to a degree, and I'm sure they're doing things in a priority of mission, criticality. But at the same time, for all we know, they've already taken care of a lot of them, and we just haven't been told about it. So, but I agree, there are a lot of tunnels. They've been discovered numerous times, and they're going to keep making more tunnels as things become more difficult. And of course, we can use technology to verify whether or not tunnels exist. We can locate them, and then we can, of course, use other technology we have that's specifically designed to destroy tunnels. So I think that we are likely already on top of it, but I don't know that for a fact because, like you said, no one's really talking about it. So let's see here. Approaching target, Ford also sold vehicles to national Germany when the rest of the country turned to the war effort. All U.S. auto manufacturers need to pay for folding to foreign production. Interesting, okay? And we will talk a little bit more about Ford here very soon, but there are some things about it that I find concerning and that you guys should be aware of. Oh, Habibi Father, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. In case you don't know, he calls me baby girl. It's not a big deal. It's just something we do. All right, so moving on. Let's go ahead and talk about why some of this might be happening and why the whole push about fentanyl is such a big thing. Because honestly, fentanyl is a big problem. It's huge. It is infiltrating all of our rural environments, all of our towns, all of our cities. It's creating a huge epidemic of drug use that's turning people into straight up zombies and then ruining their lives and everyone else's lives around them in the meantime. And it's a highly toxic and caustic drug, and it's problematic, and here we are. Of course, fentanyl is used by the medical industry as well, so of course we can thank some of those fine people for making sure that it exists in the first place, but it is what it is, right? So, historic fentanyl bust was enough to kill more than 800,000 people. The Chester County Sheriff's Office said they seized enough fentanyl from the drug bust to kill more than 800,000 people. The raid happened Friday on Berry Hill Road in the Edgemoor community of South Carolina. Deputies seized about 1,700 grams of fentanyl, 87 grams of crack cocaine, and 2 pounds of marijuana. Okay? Now, this story is from today, just so you're aware. So these things are happening even currently with everything going on around the country. Okay? They also seized 17 firearms and $91,000 in 2 vehicles as part of the drug bust. Now, look, this is your typical crime guns that we all have seen and understand exist. You know, we have the drum mags on the ARs. We have the AK that has to be there to represent crime in the best way it can. We also have the Colt Python. We got everything, right? We got a Draco Mini on the table. So everything is good to go in the sense of, yes, this was crime. But just a reminder that these people are well armed and they're well supplied and they're running around with $91,000 in cash. So they can do a lot more than you or I can, in all honesty, when it comes to organizing, getting together a group, spending money on whatever it is they want, and also having everything they need to back it up. So it's just a reminder, at least at the bare minimum from a preparedness standpoint, that these people are still extremely dangerous and also outgun you, out-finance you, and outnumber you in most circumstances. And it's just a reminder that this is why it's such a big deal, okay? Tariffs and LaMonica Dixon are facing numerous charges, including drug trafficking, possession with intent to distribute, and weapons violations. Okay? And I would have never assumed that a Draco would have shown up on that table. You know what I'm saying? All right. So now we know that this is what's happening. Now we know that the fentanyl thing is still going strong, and we know that it's getting all the way to South Carolina, which is why this isn't just a border issue. This is a straight up countrywide national issue. And yes, I do understand that the tariffs are economic more so than they are national security. I think we can all agree on that. Like, I think national security is important. And I think that the border security is a good thing. And if Mexico and Canada are willing to strengthen their side of the border so that when we strengthen our side, it is a dual effort that makes things even harder to accomplish regarding crime, I think that's a good thing. But I will say, I think the tariffs are using the excuse of this emergency situation to be implemented in the first place, which, fine, use the loopholes you can to do what you got to do to make things work. But regardless, we understand that this is a real problem regarding fentanyl trafficking and everything else. We also know that the economy is also a real problem, especially in the lopsided version of it regarding trade with some of these other countries. So I think it's kind of like a 2 birds, 1 stone, win-win type scenario that we're watching unfold right now, but it's also a necessary evil because this stuff is in your community, and it is going to affect you at some point in your life if it hasn't already. And fentanyl is definitely in my town, and I'm sure it's in your town, and it's only a matter of time until people are so bogged down by it that they're doing, crimes you would have never expected to see in such a, small part of the country. So, let's see here. Look, a rabbit said, whoa, dude, am I talking too fast? I might be. It's something that happens sometimes, okay? So, let's see here. We also have Reloading is more expensive than buying usually, says David Hicks, but it is more worth it to learn. And David Hicks, that's what I have come to learn and what I've suggested as well. I consider reloading a excellent skill to have, especially in an emergency where ammo is no longer available and you have a skill where you can reload it and stock up on components when they're not super expensive or hard to source. And I think that's great. But I do think that when you actually add in the components, the equipment, and your time and energy required to learn the skill and then also to actually reload, that the cost is a little bit high compared to just buying and stockpiling ammunition. That's just what I found, especially common calibers, right? I'm not talking about, 460 Smith & Wesson. I can reload that for cheaper than I can buy it, but I'm talking about 9mm, 45 ACP, 5.56, 308, stuff like that. That's just been my experience, but I do think you're correct about that. Now, let's see here. I'm trying to just catch everybody's things here. Sup, ladies, says Sheepdog1911. I like to get in the chat sometimes. I don't want to forget about you guys. Apparently, LA is getting interesting at the moment. Well, let's talk about that. I think that was great timing and a great segue, okay? Protests in Los Angeles over ICE raids blocks 101 freeway, okay? And this is still going on, like they said, and this is because today is a day without immigrants. We're going to talk about that a little bit more too, and then we're going to talk about where all the funding and organization for all this stuff comes from, because you need to know about it, because I'm sick of just acting like this is all organic and grassroots and everything else. It's not. And some of the companies behind this stuff are companies that we probably need to take a look at regarding why they're putting money into organizations that organize protests that shut down freeways, right? A large crowd gathered in downtown Los Angeles on Sunday to protest the recent ICE raids and deportations. The gathering closed the 101 freeway for hours. Police declared an unlawful assembly and forced demonstrators to disperse during the day-long event. The protest began on Olvera Street and grew to a few thousand people who marched to City Hall before walking into the freeway. Some protesters sat down in lanes, while many others held Mexican flags and signs with phrases such as "Nobody is illegal" and "Viva Mexico." As they marched along the busy thoroughfare while being closely watched by law enforcement, flags of several other nations were also seen. Now, I do want to comment on this really quickly, because I think this is really dumb. And I'm sorry, but if your whole inference is that you're a beneficial, positive inclusion in this economy and in this country, and that you don't want to be deported based on your immigration status, the reason for staying, I'm sure, would then mean that it's because where you are right now is better than where you originally came from, especially based on your current living standards. And yet, the protest you decide to go to is where you are waving a Mexican flag or a flag of another country and saying things like "Viva Mexico." But you're in the U.S. and you're protesting about the idea of being sent back to Mexico. That doesn't make any sense to me. And I think that you're being misled by whoever is organizing these protests, because it's not about you having a better quality of life. It's about trying to create chaos and destabilization. And you're being used as a pawn. And the fact that you thought flying a Mexican flag would be a good idea in the sense of arguing for why you should stay in the United States doesn't make any sense at all. And I think that that's pretty straightforward and logical, at least in my opinion, and that anyone who is, part of these protests might want to take a look at their game plan and strategy, because I don't think they have their priorities straight, and I don't think their messaging is very clear or effective. And that's part of protests is marketing. And I'm sorry, but it's the truth, and they need somebody who's better at it to help them out, because right now all they're telling me is that, well, they like Mexico better, so what's the big deal? Just saying. And look, I am not like some rampant guy in this fight. Like, I don't have a huge dog in this fight. I think I have my own personal beliefs, of course. Do I think illegal immigration is illegal? Yes, I do, because that's just what it is. But at the same time, I just want to let you know, like, I have met and worked alongside many people who had questionable immigration statuses throughout the years. I'm bilingual. I speak Spanish. I spent a lot of time in the hospitality industry in California, so it's pretty much an inevitability that I would work with some of these people, regardless of whether or not I felt okay about it. And the thing that you have to understand is that Sure, a huge majority of these people are just there to work and make money and do what they can to support their family. I totally get that. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you're going to go out and protest about why you should stay in the United States, you should probably be representing the United States as being the place you want to be rather than trying to promote the place that you're not wanting to go back to. I just don't understand that, and I'm sure many of the people I know personally would agree with me, even if they are one of those people, right? So, just wanted to put that out there because I think it's dumb, and I think that they need help. But regardless, I'm not going to help. At times, fireworks were heard bursting above the large crowd while demonstrators leaned out of a car window and flew their flags and shouted along with the crowd, "Si se puede," which translates to "yes, you can." See what I'm saying? The California Highway Patrol's Transportation Management Center closed lanes in both directions. As the freeway was blocked, the LAPD reported major gridlock along Spring Street, Main Street, Los Angeles Street, Arcadia Street, and both northbound and southbound lanes of the 101 freeway. This is never a good way to make your point or never a good way to make your message across, because if you're blocking me from getting home to my family or you're blocking me from being able to get to work on time, I already hate everything you're doing. And that's just the truth. So this is not an effective way to get your message out there. All it does is make people more upset about the fact that you're doing this. Some videos, purportedly from the scene, showed demonstrators spray painting along the freeway walls, and SkyCal was overheard when a Metro bus was tagged with profanity directed toward ICE. Yes, this is going to be very effective. At around 4 p.m., Los Angeles Police Department Central Division officers reported that the protesters had converged on the steps of City Hall. Police, along with Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department deputies, worked on crowd control and continuing the flow of traffic in the area. The demonstrators eventually made their way to the Main Street Bridge, blocking traffic and creating dense gridlock. Police moved the crowd from the area and blocked the road from both cars and pedestrians. Many of the people said they gathered to provide a voice to their communities as they were impacted by the new administration's immigration policies. "We're not criminals," said Sarah Aguilar, one of the many in attendance. "We want to work. A lot of people just want to work. We all want to provide. I'm out here to represent for my people. I'm out here to be the voice for the people that have been silenced out of fear." Just after 8 p.m., 2 hours after declaring unlawful assembly, a large line of police began to move toward a large group of demonstrators. Just want to say, and look, I don't care how you feel about this, and this is just logic, right? You are a criminal if you committed a crime, okay? And regardless of what that crime was, if a crime was committed, you're a criminal. Please keep that in mind. By 8 p.m., protesters were cleared and that 101 freeway was reopened, according to the Los Angeles Times, citing the California Highway Patrol. The protest came with traffic delays already impacting downtown streets near Crypto.com Arena, many of which were closed for the Grammy Awards on Sunday. Later in the day, about 250 people gathered in Picoma for another rally where police claimed drivers were performing stunts and blocking traffic with their cars. That's not a rally. That is called a street takeover, and that is the dumbest thing you can do or be at, because someone's going to hit you with their car, and then the crowd is going to come up and rob you for everything you have in your pockets. Don't ask me how I know. So that is what's happening there. Now, the protest that went on today that apparently is still going on is something that we have to be aware of. Exile Reviews, always good to see you. Thank you for modding. I really appreciate you. Same with you, Kevin Ramsey. Exile Review says, "Here comes the riots," right? Well, you know what? This might be the summer of love, right? Because that's just how these things go. But we'll see, because, I have doubts. But this is the one they're funding right now, right? We're talking about the funding here real soon, I promise, okay? So the protest today, which is just an extension of yesterday, is the Day Without Immigrants, okay? Businesses closed to support Day Without Immigrants amid Trump's immigration crackdown. Now, something I want to tell you about this protest is that this has been around since the early 2000s, right? They have done this, I think 2006 was like the first time they did a Day Without Immigrants, and then they've done it multiple times, since then, especially in 2017, I believe, and maybe in 2016 regarding Trump being elected the first time. And of course, now they're bringing it back, right? So they're going to keep doing it here and there whenever they get mad. Businesses closed, it causes, a little bit of a headache for certain people in order to kind of force a message upon them, right? But there's more to this, right? Because this is not just like, businesses don't just get on the phone and say, "Oh, hey, are you going to close today? Because I heard there was this thing going on there." "Oh, yeah, we're going to do that." No. Okay, here we go. Businesses nationwide are participating in Day Without Immigrants, closing their doors or giving employees paid time off on Monday in solidarity with the community targeted by President Donald Trump's policies and to highlight their input to everyday society, according to reports. CBS News reported that participants encouraged people not to shop, go to school, or work in their respective communities on February 3rd. The day follows Trump's recent executive orders on immigration, including one that could end birthright citizenship, opposing the 14th Amendment. It also comes amid growing fears of ongoing raids from ICE, according to the report. This is USA Today, not necessarily my beliefs or my opinion, but I do want to go ahead and say that telling people not to go to work for this cause, right, in order to force this concept upon the businesses who are involved could result in, I don't know, some of these people suddenly not having a job anymore. So great. Let's see how that turns out. Probably not the best idea. Okay. Now, D.C. and several states are participating to make their voices heard. Multiple businesses in the greater Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia area are participating in the demonstration, including La Casita Pupuseria, a multi-location Salvadorian restaurant in Maryland. Our Latino community is the heart of our businesses and an integral part of this country, the statement on social media said. Today, we take a moment to reflect on their importance, their effort, and their daily contribution. It is a time to come together, raise our voices, and show the value of our people. Other Maryland eateries joining in the movement are El Golfo in Silver Spring, Los Chorros in Wheaton, and Rio Grande Bar and Grill in Germantown. NBC Washington reported that Tex-Mex restaurant Republic Cantina and Pearl's Bagels are closed. Wow, bandwagon much? Our staff will receive a paid day off in order to make their voices heard and stress the importance of immigrants to our community and local economy, the bagel shop wrote on its Instagram story. In Oklahoma, several restaurants have announced closures, including restaurants owned by Good Egg Dining, according to the Oklahoman, part of USA Today Network. Now, here's one thing I'll tell you about this. I'll tell you right now. As somebody who worked many, many years in the restaurant industry, a huge amount of undocumented immigrants work in the restaurant industry. Why? Because it's hard to get people to work in the restaurant industry. Every restaurant you've ever eaten at or ever been to is understaffed. And all of them are desperate to hire somebody who's willing to do the job, and they're going to pay and hire anybody who's got the right paperwork and is willing to show up consistently time and time again. And unfortunately, that lends itself to being very easy for people who at least hand over the right paperwork, but may still be questionable, to get into these positions. Because these companies and these businesses are desperate for people. They never have enough people, and they're always on the edge of having to close their doors based on staffing. So it's a huge portion of where undocumented immigrants get their jobs. And people will say, one thing I've heard quite a bit, at least, in recent times was, why don't, we need American jobs, like if these should be Americans, right? Kind of like when the H-1B visa conversation started. Everybody was worried about, those are taking American jobs. Listen, I ran a lot of restaurant businesses over the years, and I never had a line out the door of Americans looking for a job. I would have loved to, and I would have enjoyed having Americans looking for jobs, but that just wasn't the reality of it. Now, if this all goes through and everything gets cracked down and these immigrants are no longer, capable of being here and participating in the workforce and everything else the way it should be, in all honesty, then these restaurants are going to probably either not make it, or they're going to have to take drastic measures in order to hire enough people to keep moving forward. And that's just business, and that's how it's going to have to be. And honestly, it's the way it should be. If you can't run your business without undocumented immigrant workers, then your business probably doesn't need to exist. And I'm sorry, but that's just the truth, because that's the law and also the way things are supposed to be. So it sucks, but it is what it is. And these businesses aren't necessarily closing because they want to give voices to their employees and to their communities. They're probably closing because everybody told them they were going to go do this protest, and they really didn't have a choice other than to close because they had nobody else to work. And that's just the truth. And those people probably aren't documented or have papers that are questionable or whatever else it might be. So just saying, this is just the truth. That's probably why they had to close. Now, who organizes and funds these protests? This is important to me. Not necessarily important to preparedness, I guess, but important to understand who is willing to finance things that might go against what it is you would like to see the country be able to do, in the sense of restructuring and getting everything organized and put back into a prosperous manner if possible, right? I don't know. Maybe that's what you care about. Maybe it's not what you care about. I understand either way, but you should be at least aware of who is paying for these things, okay? So, first off, who organizes things like a day without immigrants, right? You guys know about, BLM and all these high-profile protest groups like Antifa and everything else, right? But who's paying the bill? Like, this is where it gets interesting. So first off, one of the organizers of these events includes a little thing called United We Dream. Okay, now I want to show you what this is, just so you can see like how this all works and who's all behind everything here. Okay, so this is United We Dream. They have 1 million members across the country ready to take action for the rights and dignity of immigrants, right? They reach 4 million plus people every month, and they have 25 hubs around the country, okay? This is a professional protest organization. This is not just like, people at their local community center or at their church getting together to say, we need to go hit the streets. Like, these are well-funded, clearly well-marketed organizations that are purposely trying to encourage this type of behavior, right? Encourage this destabilization and chaotic behavior. Protests are one thing. Protests that interfere with the flow of daily life for the average person who's just trying to get by is another situation. And this is what we're seeing right now. I mean, it is what it is, but I'm just throwing it out there just so you guys know. And this is the type of company or organization that this is. It's donation-based. They have guiding principles, all this stuff, right? And they start talking over here about how they have a youth-led community. It's all immigrants and everybody else that you expect to see within these organizations, okay? So this is a big one. They are huge within this Day Without Immigrants. Another one, though, that I think that you should need to know about, because that's a specific protest organization. We get it. This is what they do, right? That's how they make their money, so they have to go do it. They have to organize it and make it happen, or else no one's going to give them money anymore, okay? Now, let's go ahead and talk about this little group right here, okay? The Service Employees International Union. Now, they've been around since 1921. And now this is a group that actually fights for all these things, okay? And organizes and funds these protests. So one thing I want you to consider is that these really well-financed and really well-organized and marketed unions, right, are also financing these movements that they aren't necessarily directly associated with, and then for what purpose, right? And of course, we know what the purpose is, but this is what they're doing. And one thing that we can do to kind of verify their involvement with these types of movements is to go through their blog situation where they, post all their own things here and talk about all the stuff they care about, right? And then here's one that just came out in December, and clearly, they have this bias towards this situation. Immigrant or not, know your rights. As a nation of immigrants, it's despicable that elected officials continue to demonize those who come to the United States and make it stronger, a better place. But let's be honest, it's greedy CEOs holding us back, blah, 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 right? So now they go through and they try to tell all these people what their rights are and everything else. Do those rights apply to people who aren't American citizens? You tell me what you think about that. But this is just what is part of their mantra, which shows that they have involvement in these types of causes, okay? Now, let's talk about the big one, okay? Who funds those organizations? Who funds United We Dream? Who puts money into foundations, like the Service Employees International Union or the National Day Labor Organizing Network, right? Or any of these other groups, right? This is what you need to know about. The reason I brought this up is because this is such a prolific company. This is a company that a lot of people spend a lot of money with, and this is a company that is probably pissed about the idea of tariffs being implemented against a lot of their products, aka their pickup trucks that they import into the country. Let's talk about the Ford Foundation. Okay, so now if you don't know about the Ford Foundation, you're going to be probably at least caught off guard to a degree here. Okay, now, this is a philanthropic organization, right? They spend all this money on organizing and putting money into these different projects, including stuff like United We Dream, right? And all these other organizations, okay? And all these union supports like Service Employees International Union and stuff like that, right? So, okay, so why does this matter? What are you talking about? Okay, well, here we go, okay? Working with visionaries on the front lines of social change worldwide. We are disrupting systems to advance social justice. We invest in transformative ideas, individuals, and institutions. Our priorities. We believe inequality is at the root of nearly every injustice. To create meaningful, lasting change, we focus on 9 interconnected areas. Here you can see all their interconnected areas, okay? And then everything is about justice, social justice, right? So, let's see here. Let's go ahead and talk about, Okay, let's talk about their history of social justice for a quick sentence, or sentence, just a sentence, actually. A second would have worked as well. Across 8 decades, the Ford Foundation has invested in innovative ideas, visionary individuals, and frontline institutions advancing human dignity around the world. Learn more about our work in civil rights, education, arts and culture, human rights, poverty reduction, and urban development, and see some of our key foundation and milestones below. Founded in 1936, okay? Yes, this is the same Ford that sells you pickup trucks. How do I know that? I mean, they just tell you right here. If we go to their origins, Henry Ford, founder of the Ford Motor Company, Edsel Ford, Henry's son, who became president of the Ford Motor Company and later established the Ford Foundation. This foundation finances a lot of this stuff. And I think that is something that's important for people to be aware of because, well, a lot of us probably own their vehicles, right? And it's just the truth. I don't know what else to say. I mean, I used to drive an F-150. I've owned 2 F-150s in my life, right? So this is what they're doing. This is part of the deal. I don't know what else to say. I just needed everyone to be aware of this because these protests are not organic. And companies like Ford are sponsoring the organizations that organize them and finance them. And I just think that that's important for everyone to be aware of because it's clear that these protests don't have the goal of the protester in mind when they're organized and when they're strategizing their marketing. Because they're waving Mexican flags. They're waving flags of other countries. They're not even promoting the idea that America's a great place to be and that's why they want to stay. They're not asking to stay. They're not saying, please let us stay because this is actually a great country that we want to be part of. Please help us find a way towards legal immigration. Please help us find a way to maintain our status here so that way we can try to, have a family and raise them on the ideals and beliefs of the American system, right? Like that's not what they're saying. They're out there in the streets, clogging up traffic, making a scene, creating chaos, and at the same time promoting the idea of other countries when they're trying to tell you that they don't want to leave or that they don't want their friends or their family to leave, right? And so they're not protesting or they're not organizing these protests with the well-being of the protesters at heart. They're organizing and strategizing these protests to create too much chaos and too much division in order to get people to want the tariffs to go away, to want the immigration enforcement to go away, to want all these policies to go away so that companies like, Ford can benefit from that. That's just my opinion, but that's what it looks like to me. And when these foundations are so involved in this stuff, how can you look at it any other way? It's not like I look at the Clinton Foundation and I'm like, well, they're only doing that out of the goodness of their heart. They definitely don't have an agenda or a bias in any way, shape, or form, right? Of course. Why would they? So this is what we're doing, okay? Now, Ford makes their trucks in Arakel Toros. Ford makes their trucks in Mexico. I can guarantee you that right now. My F-150 had a sticker right inside the door that said made in Mexico. I don't know what to tell you. F-150s are made in Mexico, bro. Yeah, are some made in the U.S.? Sure. I'm just telling you that a lot of their trucks are made there. So it is what it is, okay? Now, let's see here. Ford F-150s made in Mexico. Let's see. Because I had an F-150 with the Mexico sticker right inside the door. Locations in Ohio, Kentucky, Michigan, Missouri, Venezuela, and Mexico. Let's see here. Trying to find better information. Now, one thing I want to say is that regardless, that's what the Ford Foundation is doing, okay? So, a few are made in Missouri, yeah. And here's the thing. One thing I want you guys to keep in mind, just in case, because here is where you run into problems. If you rely on the first answer you get from AI, you will get an answer that doesn't have enough research to it. For example, I recently purchased a scope, right? And I wanted to find out what the torque value was on that scope. And what did it tell me? It said the torque value on this scope is 55 to 60 inch-pounds. Now, I was looking for the torque value of the screws that attach the scope to the mount. But it tried to give me the torque value for the mount to a Picatinny rail. And if I would have listened to the first thing that came up from an AI overview of a search, I would have just cranked that thing to 60 inch-pounds and totally ruined my mount or my scope or both. So you have to dig a little further. And we have some production of F-150s from, Cautitlan in Mexico, okay? And we also have other F-150s that are made in Mexico as well. So yes, they're made in Dearborn, Michigan. Yes, they're made in Kansas City, Missouri. And yes, they're made in Cautitlan, Mexico. And we have some others as well. And that's just from having to change my search slightly in order to verify whether or not they're made in Mexico. So, either way, Eric Hell Toro says never use AI, never. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that AI has its use, and I think that you should practice using it because it's going to become a, let's just say, relatively large part of society here in the near future, whether or not you want it to be. And so learning how it works and how its prompts work can teach you how that's going to affect your future. But at the same time, I also think that it could help you deal with any AI threats in the future too. Because if we know how it thinks and how it operates, maybe that helps a little bit with dealing with Terminator. So, now, Ed Case, I used to like your channel. Ford will be here after you. What's wrong with my channel, Ed? Just because I brought up the fact that the Ford Foundation is funding these protests that are inorganic and randomly spawning across the country in order to make a point that benefits them financially. That's all I was bringing up, man. That's all I was bringing up. So, wanted to bring that up because here's the other organization that funds and organizes these protests, the Open Society Foundation, which works very similarly to the Ford Foundation and what their goals are and what their mission statement is and everything else. And interestingly enough, the Open Societies Foundation, founded by George Soros, are the largest private funder of independent groups working for rights, equity, and justice. Sound familiar to any other foundation we just discussed? I have a feeling it is, okay? The Open Society Foundations champion the search for bold democratic solutions to our urgent common challenges that advance rights, equity, and justice, right? We do it by supporting a wide array of independent voices and organizations around the world that provide a creative and dynamic link between the governing and the governed. Our approach seeks to counter the narrow pursuit of political self-interest and short-term opportunism in pursuit of a sustainable future for people and planet that leaves no one behind. Right. That's everything I associate with George Soros. Just want to throw that out there, okay? So, all I'm trying to say is that we have to be aware that these things aren't organic and that they're going to keep happening. And this is part of the growing pain scenario. But anything that happens because of these protests, like what we saw in 2020, remember where the money in the organization of these protests comes from. Right? And just be aware of that when you move forward with your life and with dealing with some of these companies because, well, I mean, how do you hold anybody accountable otherwise, right? Right. Brought to you by Ford. Our last disaster was brought to you by Pfizer. Yeah, 100%. So, let's see here. City Prepper says, I'm so glad we moved on from the Palestine to the Mexico. Yeah, exactly. And the same groups were involved in that as well. And that's just how this all works. And that's the rotating doors of the proverbial protest building, right? So, we are in interesting times. The tariffs already shut down for 30 days, minus the China situation. But China, like we said earlier, might be just holding off to say, okay, they only put 10% on. Maybe we need to wait and see if this gets worse or if 10% is all we have to deal with, and maybe that's something we try to work around or negotiate with. Canada and Mexico both said, all right, hold up. Let's start doing some stuff that you guys would like to see. Give us a little time to negotiate, maybe figure out something that makes you decide 25% is too high, right? That's probably where the strategy began. Do I think our cost of living will go up in the interim? Most likely, especially related to the Chinese situation. Do I think that we're likely to see costs go up in general just because of the current state of the world and the economy? Yeah, I do. And honestly, like the stock market today and even the crypto market was out of control. So there's a lot that you should be paying attention to right now in the sense of change. But a lot of people wanted this change. And I think that's where things needed to, head towards, whether or not it's all in the way that we thought it would be or whether or not we agree with the strategy or the trajectory. Change is happening and we have to kind of just adapt to it because, well, that's where we're at now, right? And I think that we can make it work. So let me know your thoughts. If you think that the tariffs are good, if you think they're bad, if you think this was a strategy always from the beginning, if it was always a bluff per se, and let me know if you think about these protests are going to expand or grow or become even more problematic, or if they'll fizzle out eventually, or if these groups that we just discussed, these organizations that like to fund these things, are going to keep doing so, and if these foundations need to maybe check themselves when it comes to what it is they're up to, because I find it very odd that they have involvement with a lot of these groups that are the ones who are providing the financing and the funding, or I guess that's the same thing, and the organization to these groups in order to get out there and actually create these scenarios. Nobody's just doing this organically. It's always done through an organization, through an entity, and incentives are there. And if you don't think the people who are out there blocking traffic, waving Mexican flags weren't incentivized to some degree, probably mistaken. Do I think there's a lot of people who just go there in order to have social clout, or maybe to white knight for other people they think need their protection? Yeah, those people are definitely there as well. But there are people who began the whole thing through a network of financiers and organizers. That's just how it works. Colleen Rich Pickett, hello to you as well. Hello to you as well. Mohammed Azar, good to see you. We also have you're okay with whoever funded January 6th, I'm sure. You know what? The federal government funded a lot of the things that happened there, and I'm not okay with that. So you're right. Sorry, I had to take it, low-hanging fruit. Listen, everybody's going to have their own opinion, and I get that, okay? But you know what? It is what it is. Let's see. Eric El Toros wants me to talk about AIPAC. Well, I'm not prepared to talk about that right this second because I like to get things put together in a structured way. But you know what? We will talk about that because I'm not afraid to talk about that because we got to do things that make the most sense for what our country needs to do. And I don't always agree with the things that we relate ourselves to. And that's just the way it is, okay? I don't know how else to say it, but yeah, maybe we'll talk about that in a future live stream where I have some time to structure it and organize it in the same way that I did tonight. So, Mohammed, I don't think we're gonna agree on a lot of things based on this conversation, but that's okay. You can have your opinion. But I think you're worried about a singular event that really turned out to, I don't know, just be what it was, right? Versus a continuation of nationwide protests that tend to have a bigger impact on a larger population for longer periods of time. And that's just the truth. I don't know what to tell you. And that's just actually a logical fact. It's not that's just what it is. But here we are. So let's find out. It says people don't understand that tariffs are a bargaining chip. Well, of course they are. And obviously, I think that the chip was used appropriately in this moment, but I also think that it still has a propensity to become problematic if things go south. We just have to see how it turns out. But I'm not at the helm. I'm just the guy who's watching what happens, right? And that's the best we can do. And one thing I want to go ahead and say is that while you're worried about preparedness, okay, avoiding things like protests is something I do. It's probably a good idea if you're worried about your personal safety or any issues you see occurring in the future thereafter, right? That's just me. I avoid large gatherings, especially ones that have let's just say, a security element that might be concerning. And then I also would suggest avoiding the southern border, right? So don't be a hiker hiking down the southern border right now when there's a threat of explosive drones being used by cartels to attack, the military and police. Probably not the best place to be. So use your smarts and use your adaptability to avoid issues to begin with, right? And then the same thing can be said about anything else moving forward regarding tariffs or the economy or anything like that, right? Be smart about where your money goes, and hopefully you can make it last that much longer. But another thing to keep in mind, and this is just me throwing this out there, okay? If something doesn't affect you directly and there's nothing you can do about it and it doesn't have any effect on your personal preparedness, limit the amount of investment you're willing to put into it. And what I mean by that is like investing your time and energy into something that can't really change anything about your personal situation. And so like an example of that, I guess in my opinion, would be like this recent rash of plane accidents. Do we know for sure that there wasn't some sort of nefarious reason behind why so many issues occurred with airliners during a short period of time? Of course not. Do we have evidence that there was something like that happening? Not, at least to my knowledge. And do these, if you were to Occam's razor the situation, seem like unfortunate accidents more than anything else? I would say most likely. And not to mention incompetence and lack of maintenance and everything else related to the way anything that flies has been treated over the last few decades. But regardless, it's still okay to be curious and wonder what's happening. But is it the thing to focus on if your top priority is being better prepared? I don't know, right? But these are just the inner workings of a madman, apparently, because it's just my advice or suggestion regarding how much time and energy to put into some of these things. That's all, right? And I just wanted you guys to know that, Ford has some interesting investments and some interesting funding that it throws to interesting groups. And I thought you should be aware of that because, well, most people probably consider them to be a very American company. It doesn't always seem that these companies are that way, now does it? And I think that applies to a lot of companies, right? So here we are. Good live chat, said David Drago. Well, I appreciate it. Let's see here. We also have Eric Altoro says, sweet, can't wait. Well, it's something that we can discuss here in the future. Tony Elbows, I'm in Colorado. Crazy as well. Everyone of HISP flavor on edge and screwed up faces. Well, I can understand why you'd be on edge if you're worried about the situation going on right now. And honestly, there's a lot of people who probably, don't deserve to be caught in the crossfire or in the dragnet, but it is going to be what it is, and there's not much I can personally do about that. So this is what we're doing, okay? Listen, the private live stream starts at 9:15. It is, just that. It's private. If you want to be part of it, you can hit the join button down below, and it will be on the community tab on my channel page for YouTube members. You can also be part of it by joining the Subscribe Star. I will put a link in the chat right now, and that is another place where you can directly support the channel while getting some additional content and possibly exclusive information, but not something that is pertinent to your preparedness, just stuff that we discuss for generally casual purposes and a good time. So make sure you check that out if you would like. I will go ahead and ensure that we have the members only live stream posted right now on the community tab. Anything else you need from me, go to magicprepper.com. There's a lot of stuff there, so just be aware of that. And besides that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.